Hi there. Welcome to this tutorial on building and testing your very own app in Webflow. I'm Victoria Plummer from the Developer Relations team, and I'm here to guide you through everything from registering your app to exploring the powers of the Designer and Data APIs. By the end of this video, you'll have a fully functional starter app and a deeper understanding of how to extend Webflow's capabilities through our APIs. Let's dive in. The first step in app development is setting up your workspace to be able to test and run your app. So the first thing we'll want to do is create a test site. I have a template site already from Webflow developers with some custom code examples that we'll walk through in this demo. I'll go ahead and clone this site to my desired workspace. And there we have it. So we'll go through these examples a little later on, but let's jump back to our workspace. We recommend setting up a separate workspace for app development. If you don't have a workspace already or don't have a developer workspace, go ahead and apply for a developer workspace plan. This is a free plan that gives app developers access to advanced Webflow features. What's included are up to 3 users for collaboration and testing, a 120 requests per minute rate limit, unlimited unhosted sites, enabling you to use custom code, the site activity log, and page branching. There are some limitations. Go ahead and review those, and then you can apply for the workspace here. We will add this information in the description below. Jumping back into our workspace, let's go ahead and register our first Webflow app. To register a Webflow app, we'll need to be in our workspace. We'll go to Integrations, and then we'll see this app development section in our integrations panel. From here, we'll create an app and enter some info about our app. I will call this my amazing Webflow app. And I will say this app demonstrates Designer and Data API capabilities as a hybrid app. I'll upload a quick logo, crop it, add my homepage URL, and that's all the info I need right now. Moving over to building blocks, these are the services that allow you to work with the different Webflow APIs. With a Designer extension, I can toggle this on to work with the Designer APIs. And for the REST API, I can toggle this on as well to work with our data APIs. So one thing to note is that if you create a data client, it will always be a data client. You can't undo that, but you can create a Designer extension and then later on add a data client. The data client asks us for a little bit more information because we'll need to authorize with the Webflow backend. And to do that, we'll go through an OAuth process where Webflow will send an authorization screen to the user. And once the user authorizes, it'll send information back to our server, back to our data client. So we need an address that Webflow can send that information back to. This is our redirect URI. For our test, we're going to use localhost 3000/API/auth/callback, and we'll show that route in our example app. Additionally, we'll need some scopes or permissions about what the app is allowed to do. So we want to allow our app to see information about the authorized user, manage custom code, so read and write custom code, and manage sites. That's all we want. We don't want to add more scopes than needed because if we do, our users might not want to use our app because it might do too much. So let's only ask for the scopes that we need. Now I've created my app, and down at the bottom of my app development section, I've got a little panel of information about my amazing Webflow app. I can see my icon, the title, the description, and homepage. And then I also have a couple buttons below. I have publish extension version. So if I want to publish my app, I can publish it. This is only for Designer extensions and hybrid apps. I can install the app, edit the app. So I can edit this information at any time. I now have a client ID, which is my unique identifier for my app, and a client secret, which is what I will send to Webflow when sending authentication credentials or requesting authentication credentials. I also have a Designer URI extension or Designer extension URI, and this is where our Designer extension will be served from. This is very helpful when setting up cores because you can then tell your backend that you want to accept requests from this specific URI. Then we show that it's a development app versus a marketplace app, and we can see any versions that we've published to Webflow. Now, before we can install our app, we'll need to get it up and running so that Webflow has somewhere to send our users' credentials when they authorize. We've provided some starter code to get you up and running with the basics in our GitHub repo, our Webflow examples GitHub repo. Here, this is the hybrid app starter that will allow you to set up a Webflow data client server, set up a designer extension front end, authenticate from the designer extension, and make designer and data API calls from the designer extension. This starter code is built using Next.js for our backend and a React front end built with Vite. To go ahead and get started, we'll click this code button and copy this GitHub CLI command. You'll need to have the GitHub CLI command or the GitHub desktop, as well as Node.js and a package manager. I'll be using NPM. And because we're using a database to store our authorization tokens, you might need Python. I did on my computer. With the CLI command copied, I'll go ahead and open up my IDE. I'm using Cursor. I'll open up my terminal, cd into my project folder, and clone my repo. Perfect. Now we'll open up that project. And now I can see my project and the project files in the sidebar. First things first, let me go ahead and install some dependencies. Oops, there we go. All right, and now let's look into the two main folders, Data Client and Designer Extension. Data Client is our Next.js app. We have some configuration here, as well as a .env.example file. This is where our environment variables will be stored. We'll need our client ID, our client secret, and our designer extension URI. I've gone ahead and added my information to .env, and we'll rename it to .env so that it can be used in our app. We also have an app folder where our Next.js app lives. We have an API, we have a database, and we have a library with some logic as well. Let's look at our API routes. So we have some auth routes, and what might look familiar, as you see with a Next.js app, when you have an API, by default, you'll have API/auth/callback or whatever your folder structure is. So ours will be API/auth/callback. Our first auth endpoint is authorize. This route just creates an authorization link. Oh, let me actually go into the data client and install those dependencies, so we don't have the little red squigglies underneath. While that's completing, I just want to walk through our routes. So this route uses the Webflow client, imports it from the Webflow API, our JavaScript SDK, some responses for the next server, as well as a type since we're using TypeScript. So we'll be using OAuth scope to show that we're passing scopes as OAuth scope. But this function just creates an authorization URL using the Webflow client, grabs the scopes that we want to include, grabs the client ID from our environment variables, and then sends the redirect URL, sends the authorization URL to the user when they hit this endpoint. The callback is what Webflow will call once a user has authorized for workspaces or a site. So here, this GET request will come with parameters. We'll grab the parameters. We'll find the code parameter, which we will need to then tell Webflow that we want an access token. And to get one, we will provide our client ID, our client secret, and the code that Webflow provided for us. Once we've gotten the access token, we can then instantiate the Webflow client. After instantiating, we can use the client to go ahead and grab a list of authorized sites from the list sites endpoint. And then for each site, we'll go ahead and store in our database the site ID and the access token. This will help us retrieve information when we're authorizing in our designer extension. And remember, right now we're in our data client. If we need to close a pop-up, we can, and then we can provide a authorization complete screen. Our last authorization route is the token route. This is actually a route that the designer extension will call to the data client, and it'll send the site ID and a Webflow ID token generated by the designer APIs. This ensures that a person using the designer extension is also authorized to use the data client. What the data client will do is get the access token that's stored using the site ID. So if the site ID and access token match, it can then verify the user's ID token with Webflow by sending a request to Webflow. Webflow will then send user information like the username, the user ID, and the user's email. And then the data client will create a user database record saying this user ID is allotted this access token. We will then create a session token using JWT and then send that session token back to the designer extension so that we don't send sensitive credentials like an authorization token to a browser-based extension. So here's the post request. Here is where we're getting the access token. This is some logic that we've already created. Then we'll go ahead and grab that ID token. We will send a request to Webflow to get the user details. So we'll resolve the token to get user details. This token endpoint is in beta right now, so that's why we're using fetch versus using the SDK. Then we'll get the user data as a response, create a session token for that user, and then store the user ID with the access token that we have. We'll then send the session token back to the designer extension and complete our auth. Moving on to some other routes, we've also set up routes to call information from the Webflow APIs or from the Webflow data API. So calling information around registered custom code, applying custom code, listing sites. And for each of these endpoints, we'll need to make sure that we verify the authentication by making sure we have the session token and have an access token, create or instantiate the Webflow client, and then call the endpoint. Let's jump into our designer extension. So I'll collapse these folders, jump into designer extension, and we also have a bunch of configuration files. We have some Vite configuration files, some TypeScript specific configuration files, but the main ones to look out for are webflow.json, where we can see the name of our app, the size, and the API version, as well as the public directory where we're going to bundle our files from. So you'll see we have this distribution folder that has our index for our single page application, as well as our CSS and JavaScript assets. If we go into package.json, we'll see that we have a build command that uses Vite build and then uses the Webflow CLI to bundle and then move that bundle to our development folder, our bundle folder, where we can then grab that zip file. Speaking of that, we'll need to install the Webflow CLI. So I'll go ahead and do that. And we need to install it globally for this to work. So we've installed that. And then one more thing that I wanted to show before we get into the designer extension is our tsconfig.json files. So here for our development, we have a tsconfig.app.json and a tsconfig.node.json file. In these files, you want to make sure that you've defined your type roots so that you can grab the TypeScript types, as well as the Webflow specific designer extension typings. Once we've done that, we can jump into our app in the source folder. And we can see we have app.tsx, which is our main app component. And we are importing a lot of hooks and React modules, as well as components. And we're already using the Webflow APIs to interact with the canvas. So here I'm setting the extension size to large, but even if we dig down into some of our components, like the element dashboard, we can see that we're even using webflow.getSelectedElement and then also webflow.subscribe to interact with the canvas and make some changes. Now that we've reviewed the structure of our app, let's go ahead and start it so we can see what it looks like in Webflow. I'll go ahead and open up my terminal. I will cd into my hybrid app starter and then run npm run dev to get my dev command. This will run the backend and the front end, so the data client and the designer extension. And I can just jump into localhost 3000, and this page will just automatically redirect me to my authorization screen. Here, I can authorize to either my entire Webflow workspace, a single site, or multiple sites. And here I can see that this app can read site data, custom code data, and authorize user data, as well as view my designs. And it can make changes to my site data, my custom code data, and it can edit designs. I'm going to go ahead and just authorize it to a single site. If I authorize it to a web workspace or multiple sites, it would take me back to my dashboard, but I want to see it take me back to my site. So I've authorized, it's going to take me to the site that I authorized to, and it'll have the pane open. And if I have a development app or an app bundle already installed, it would even open my app. When we open the apps panel, or the panel for my amazing Webflow app, we'll see this is a little bit different than a marketplace app. I have an app development section here with my local development URL, and I have the option to launch my developed app. I can launch the app if I upload it to Webflow already, but we'll get to that later. So I'll click Launch Development App and open my app. Here, I've launched my Webflow app and I can see, hello, stranger. My designer extension doesn't know who I am, even though my data client was authorized and does know who I am. So to kick off this connection, I'm going to click Authorize App and authorize my sites. I'm actually going to authorize all of them versus my Workspace and see what happens. All right, now my app knows who I am. So it says, hello, Victoria, and I can list the authorized sites. All right, so even though I authorized all of the other sites on my designer extension flow, because we're calling from the data client, what the data client has, it only has my one site, which is fine. But now I can see that I can pull from the data client into the designer extension. And to even go a bit further, let's go ahead and open up our developer tools in the console and see what that looks like. I'm going to zoom in a little bit here so I can log my storage and see that I have a session token that's saved under WF_hybrid_user, and I can see my session token. Let's see if I can make this bigger or copy this whole thing. So I've got my email, expiration, and my session token, which can be decoded using JWT to get my name. And then I'll send the session token back towards my data client to authorize with each request, like this list authorized sites request. Now let's see what this app can do. So over in this hamburger menu, I have some options. I can look at the custom code option or the elements option. Let's look at what we can do with elements. I'm gonna bring this breakpoint, make it a little bit bigger. So it says element styles dashboard, select an element to view its details. So let me click heading jumbo. And now my app is showing me what the designer extension will show me for my app. So here I have the name heading jumbo, the ID of the element, the type heading, the styles heading jumbo. Maybe that's a little bit better. And I see that it has children. And here there's no children on the header, but in the designer APIs, children are any text of a heading or text element. So this child is just a string. If I go one up to container, I can actually see the whole element tree. So here I can see all of this. And if I go to my navigator, I can see that same thing. I've got the container, the child is intro wrap. I can see what styles have been applied as well. And then I can also see the raw styles. So I can see the raw styles for all the different breakpoints. So I can see max width, margin right, all that kind of stuff. So this is very interesting to see what the designer APIs can call back. One nice thing that I want to show about designer extensions and kind of just in development mode is you can actually use the designer APIs straight from the console. And how I do this is I inspect my designer extension, and then over in the console, my local host will be selected. And from here, I can start using the Webflow APIs. So let me minimize my Webflow app, and let's start using the Webflow APIs to get a selected element. So we'll say const selected element equals await Webflow dot, and now we can see the designer APIs in our console. I'll say get selected element, let it autocomplete. Let's console.log that selected element. So when we get selected element, we get the component ID that has the component ID as well as the element ID. Now let's jump into the examples that we've included on our test site. So we have this pointer tracking example that if I click it in preview, I'll go to this pointer tracking page. And this is an example from Webflow from Jack McAvoy of this little guy named Rumple, who will look at your pointer, and if you wave over his belly, he'll wave. So we want to try to get this in our site. And to do that, we'll need to add a custom element as well as some custom code. So let's see how we can do that on our pointer tracking example. So here I have a container, and let me go back and make sure into my console. And focus on my developer extension, my designer extension, sorry. I find the easiest way to do this is just to inspect. There we go. Okay, and we'll minimize again. So let's play around with the designer APIs to do this. First, let's select this element. We'll say const selected element. There we go. And then from here, let's add an element. So we can add an element by, and we'll add a DOM element. We'll say await dot selected element dot after. So we'll add it after, so it'll come in the tree after. It won't be a child, but it will come after. And then we'll say what type of element we want it to be. And we can use that from element presets. No element presets. Oops. And I want this to be a DOM element. So we've gone ahead and created a DOM element. So I thought, there it is. No, let's find it. There it is. I might need to zoom out a little bit and see it. But we've created this DOM element or custom element as a div block. Now let's go ahead and turn that into a canvas element. So I will say await DOM element dot set tag. We can only do this on DOM elements, and I'll set it to canvas since that's what our rumple looks guy was in the pointer tracking example. The pointer tracking example also has a custom attribute of ID rumple looks canvas. So I'll go ahead and add that. So await DOM element dot set attribute ID. It looks like I've done this before. Rumple looks canvas. Now, if we look at the settings on our canvas, we can see that we have that ID. So that's great. We've got that all set up, but now we have to add some custom code to our site. We can do this in our app that we've set up. One thing we wanted to show was the ability to use the custom code data APIs in your designer extension to make the setup for an app a little bit easier. So you can see here, I have to register a script, and I can register an inline JavaScript script or a hosted script URL from something like a CDN. The Reeve example says we need to grab this from a hosted source. So let me grab this. And I'll actually just take those off. Oops, I registered it as inline JavaScript. Let me try again. Hosted script URL. There we go. And now let's see if we also have this inline script. We don't need the script tags. We can just grab that JavaScript and paste it in as inline JavaScript and register that code as well. Now when we go to manager scripts, we see a couple scripts because I have done this before, but the ones we want to worry about are the last two we just did. So we'll go ahead and grab the first one, and we see we can apply a script to a site or pages, just like we can in the Webflow UI. I'm going to apply it to pages. I'm going to look for our pointer tracking example. I'm going to apply that script to the header. All right. Then I'm going to select my other script, my inline script. And you can name your scripts. I just named them programmatically so I didn't have to worry about it. But I'm going to apply this to the footer. And now when we look at our page, we will see that we have my amazing Webflow app has applied some scripts. One of them I applied before. I'm just going to get rid of it really quickly. So here we can see the script we applied is the one from the CDN in the header, the Reeve script, and then Rive script, sorry. And then this one is the inline script that we applied as well. When we apply custom code, we need to publish. But before we do, I just wanted to show that this is what we mean by making it a little bit easier. A lot of apps ask you to go ahead and paste that custom code right here, but there can be a lot of mistakes in between that, like the copy, the paste, they might put it in the wrong place. This allows you to have more control, and it lets users know what scripts are applied and by which apps. So we'll close this, save the changes, give a quick publish to our site. And now we should be able to see our pointer tracking. There's our rumple, and he's following our tracker. And when we rub over his tummy, he gives us a wave. So that is a little overview of both adding custom code through the data APIs, seeing them populate on a page settings, as well as using the designer APIs, discard, to create a custom element that has custom attributes all programmatically. For our last step, we're going to try to bundle our app and submit it to Webflow. So this is very specific to designer extensions. And for designer extensions, you submit the bundle to Webflow, and then Webflow will host the app or host the designer extension from Webflow from that designer URI that we saw earlier. So let's go ahead and jump out of the running app. So I'll close that. And as you remember, when we go into package.json for the designer extension, and I'll cd designer extension, I have two build commands. I have a build command for production and a build command for development. I'm going to use the build command for development right now, but it uses Vite to build the app, and then it uses the Webflow extension bundle command from the CLI that we installed to then bundle specifically for Webflow. So let's go ahead and try that command. npm run bundle :dev, and something happened. Missing script. Let's see. Oh, build. Sorry, not build, the bundle, build. I always forget that. Build :dev. So we're bundling for development. Vite is going through its build step, or Vite will build first, then we'll bundle. And now when we jump into our bundle folder in development, we have a new bundle file. This file we can then go take to Webflow. So let's jump back into Webflow, and we'll need to go back to our dashboard and back to our integrations pane and find our app. So in my amazing Webflow app, remember we have this publish extension version button. So we can use this button, and then it'll say upload zip file. Let's go find that zip file in my documents, hybrid app starter, designer extension, bundle, development, and our latest one. Here we are. We'll upload that, publish for internal testing, so for our workspace only. You can submit for the designer extension to review, but you'll also need to fill out the form for submitting a Webflow app with all of your details and marketing info for your listing. And then we can say submission version notes. So I will just say first, published, bundle, hooray. We'll upload. And now we successfully submitted our extension. What makes this a little bit different is if we jump back to our site. Let's see. I didn't have my site open, but there we go. When we open our apps pane now, that launch app button is no longer disabled. And when we launch app, now we're launching directly from Webflow. Some things are missing, so I've got to figure out what's going on. Let's see. Oh, there we go. Hello, stranger. So just took a little bit. And then if I inspect this, we're no longer running from localhost. We no longer see that dev button or pill right here. And we can see that this is coming from that designer extension URI that was listed in our workspace, right? So down here, we're serving it from this URL now instead of localhost. So now you can see what your app will look like running on development versus running on localhost. That's a wrap for this tutorial. We just built a hybrid app that authenticates through the designer extension, adds a custom element to the page, programmatically adds custom code to our site, and we even got our interactive animation working. Now it's your turn. Try building your own app and let us know what you create. And check the description below for links to resources, the starter app repo, and our developer docs. If you found this helpful, don't forget to like this video to help more developers find it too. And if you have questions or ideas for future tutorials, drop a comment below. The developer relations team is listening, and we would love to hear from you. Thanks for watching and have fun building. See you next time. Bye.